Welcome boys and girls, Christine here with a discussion about the next Total War game that Creative Assembly is going to be announcing at the Game of the Year Awards show of 2025 in the next couple of hours. Now, we don't know for certain, as I'm recording this video, what game it is going to be, but I do want to go over the likely scenarios and maybe even some of the more unlikely ones. Of course, the one game that has been talked about the most is Warhammer 40K Total War. Valorant has talked about it, various sources have talked about it, Total War Center, Legend. It has been known for a while that this is the next likely Total War game. And apparently, if we look back to the leak from 2023, the development of that game was going well. At least until Hyenas, Shadows of Change, etc. But first off, let's talk about what I really doubt the next game is going to be. And that is Age of Sigmar. I am very skeptical of any idea that Creative Assembly is going to do an Age of Sigmar Total War game. At least right now, and I emphasize that when I say it. Because while an Age of Sigmar Total War game would make a lot of sense from a business standpoint, it doesn't make quite as much sense for Creative Assembly to release another medieval fantasy game when they're still supporting Warhammer 3. It makes more sense for them to continue supporting Warhammer 3, and they have stated they will, release in a cache, release other DLCs, then switch to the next big title they have in production, the one they're going to announce now, and Medieval 3, and then, after a couple of years, do an Age of Sigmar game. If they want to. That would be my perception on that subject. And you can throw any other medieval fantasy settings. You can think of Game of Thrones, you can think of Witcher, you can think of Lord of the Rings. None of those games are likely to be announced at the Game of the Year Awards show right now. And before you ask, yes, it is going to be a Total War game. It's not going to be an announcement on Alien Isolation, though. Maybe Creative Assembly could do Alien versus Predator versus USMC Total War. Would be weird. I mean, they could, but it's more of a limited universe. But we've certainly had Aliens: The Dark Descent, and that has worked out, but I don't think that is the direction Creative Assembly is going to go with. They are going to release Alien Isolation 2, but they're not going to make a strategy game in that universe. It is a possibility, that's why I'm mentioning it, but I find it very unlikely. So if it's not going to be a medieval fantasy game, then we have to talk about Star Wars, because Star Wars Total War has been hinted at, leaked, rumored, etc. But it should be pointed out what we actually know about Star Wars and what every leak and rumor suggests about that. They're not saying that Creative Assembly is going to do it anytime soon. What they are saying instead is that Creative Assembly is looking or considering to do it in the future, but only once they've done another sci-fi game to set up the gameplay of space combat, planets, galactic war, etc. That is Creative Assembly's plan, because Star Wars is a very popular universe. Popular in the sense that is deeply ingrained in popular culture. Everyone knows what Star Wars is, and if you release a good Star Wars game, a lot of people are just going to buy it because it's a Star Wars game, if it has any degree of competent developers behind it. So Star Wars could happen, but I think we don't have any evidence to support that argument at the moment. If there were more leaks, if there was more data, if there was more discussion, I would say we could have Star Wars, but I think we're several years away from having a Star Wars Total War game, if we ever do. Because ultimately, it depends on Disney, it depends on the shareholders, it depends on Sega, it depends on the contracts. Worth pointing out that when Creative Assembly announced Medieval Free at their 25th anniversary, and they said it was in pre-production, what a lot of people took that as that Creative Assembly had worked on a World War I game, they canceled it, and then they moved to Medieval Free. That's, by the way, what the leak suggested, and the way they announced Medieval Free supports that. So even if they want to make a Star Wars game, it's not set in stone. That's my point with that little tangent over there. Okay, so if it's not a medieval fantasy game, if it isn't Star Wars right now, then what is it? Well, that leaves 40K Total War. This is the one we've heard the most news about, specifics about, because it's not that we just heard about Creative Assembly talking about, or leaks suggesting Creative Assembly is working on 40K. We've also heard specifics, like Valrak has talked about races, campaign modes, factions that they would have. So it would be Eldar, it would be Space Marines, it would be Imperial Guard, it would be Greenskins. Not Chaos initially, but that's actually fine. And if you look at Warhammer 1, Chaos was not supposed to be a launch race in Warhammer 1. They were going to do Dwarves, Empire, Vampire Counts, and Greenskins. Sure, it's different with Eldar, Imperial Guard, Space Marines, and so on, but you understand the idea. Chaos makes sense to release later because Chaos is ultimately corrupted humans. So build the human factions first, the Imperial Guard and the Space Marines, maybe the Mechanicus, and then go down the path of Chaos. Or maybe not the Mechanicus yet, but do that later. Also, kind of worth pointing out to the Mechanicus, Games Workshop has been heavily pushing the Adeptus Mechanicus as of late, and that's the reason Dawn of War 4 has them. And this is something I should address. Some people will argue that Games Workshop would not want a competitor to Dawn of War 4. That's not really the case, because they already will have another strategy game coming out next year. It's called Mechanicus 2, and they also have the Adeptus Mechanicus in Dawn of War 4. So if the argument is competition, yes, Mechanicus 2 is different than Total War, different than Dawn of War, but that's the thing, Total War would be a very different game than Dawn of War 4. Different audiences, and really, dependent on release schedule and the amount of DLC, you would have an overlap in the player base. People would not just play like, oh, we'll just play Total War. No, we'll play Total War and Dawn of War 4. Many of us, right? Many hardcore fans would do that. So if that's argument, I don't think it holds a lot of water. It depends on how they handle timings, etc. But Games Workshop is very clear on this. They don't mind having multiple games in the same universe of the same type. They've done it before, and they're accelerating that process. In point of fact, Games Workshop wants as many video games done in the Warhammer universe as possible. Now, sure, they would probably love an Age of Sigmar big budget game, but Age of Sigmar just isn't there yet. It also should be pointed out, every single Age of Sigmar video game has not done well, which is a relevant point if we're talking about video game publishers. So until someone takes that risk and actually delivers a good game that sells well, we're not going to have a AAA budget video game in Age of Sigmar. And if we do, it's probably going to come down from Creative Assembly, but not at the moment. So those would be the main points, the main candidates. I would say, like, could be Star Wars, could be a fantasy game, maybe. I think it's unlikely, but it is a possibility. Could be Star Wars. We might be surprised. Could be something completely unrelated to everything we've talked about so far. Because there is a crazy idea that I've developed over the last couple of days of what Creative Assembly could do. I'm not saying they will, but they could do it. What would be a surprise would be Creative Assembly to do Halo Total War. And you might think that's crazy. Except, hear me out, it's not as crazy as you think. Creative Assembly developed Halo Wars 2. Sega, or rather Relic under Sega, made Age of Empires 4. So you have some business relationship between both Creative Assembly and Sega with Microsoft. And We've seen that Microsoft is interested in strategy games. We've seen them spending a lot of money. And think on this as well. One of the key points that came from that 25th anniversary is that Creative Assembly's new Total War engine would have console support. Microsoft is the one company that has been pushing the idea of strategy games on consoles the most. They did it with Age of Mythology. They've done it with other games. They are actively working on that. That's Microsoft's gaming plan. Whether or not that remains the same in the future, given everything that's happening in Microsoft, is a different discussion. But would it surprise anyone if Creative Assembly were to make a Halo Total War game? I mean, there's certainly enough factions. There's certainly enough cultural interest. It's just an idea. I mean, I 99% expect the next game is going to be Warhammer 40K, to be clear. That's the most logical, sensical point. But if it is a surprise, maybe we get something like Halo Total War. Or maybe something completely unexpected, or more expected, like, I don't know, Gears of War Total War, or Game of Thrones Total War. But I do think it's a sci-fi game, because if you look at the game director, Attila, he's worked on sci-fi strategy games before, or at least one of them. So keep that aspect in mind. I guess we'll find out over the next couple of hours. Christine, signing out. Stay tuned for more, and give me your ideas on what you expect it to be. Again, I mostly expect it's going to be 4K Total War. Old evidence points in that direction, but you never know. It is Creative Assembly after all.